The hammer came down before Matilda Cooper even had her coffee poured. She heard it through the thin walls of the farmhouse, that sharp crack of iron against wood, rhythmic and certain, and her hand froze over the tin cup because nobody was supposed to be on her property. Not today. Not ever again without her permission. She had made that abundantly clear to every soul in Redemption Creek, Arizona territory, in the year of our Lord 1882, after she buried her husband and told the whole town to leave her be. She moved to the window, slowly, like she already knew what she would see and was steeling herself against it. Orville McCrae stood at the far corner of her east fence line, his back to her, a post driver in one hand and a freshly cut rail in the other. He had rolled his sleeves to his elbows despite the morning chill that still clung to the high desert air, and his hat was tipped back just enough that she could see the line of his jaw when he turned his head to check his angle. The broken fence post, the one she had been putting off fixing for 6 weeks, the one she told herself she would get to before winter, lay discarded in the dirt beside him. He had already dug it out. He had already measured and cut the replacement. He was already halfway finished. Matilda did not move for a long time. She stood at that window with her cold coffee, and she watched him work, and she tried, with everything she had, with all the iron her grief had forged into her spine, not to feel it. She tried not to feel the way his shoulders moved under his shirt, easy and capable. She tried not to feel the warmth that crept into her chest when he paused to check his work with a critical eye, the same way Thomas used to check his work, that particular male satisfaction in a thing done right. She tried not to feel the dangerous, treacherous softness that threatened to come apart behind her ribs like old rope giving way under too much weight. She had secrets. Orville McCrae had something to do with those secrets, whether he knew it or not, and she had every reason in the world to go out that door and send him away. She did not go out that door. Not yet. That was the moment everything between them truly began, though neither of them could have named it as such. Looking back, Matilda would later say it was the moment she started losing the war she had declared against her own heart. But to understand why she was fighting that war, and what it cost them both before they found their way to the other side of it, you have to go back 3 months. Back to the day Orville McCrae first rode into Redemption Creek, and the day Matilda first understood that the past she had buried was not nearly as dead as she had believed. Redemption Creek sat in the shadow of the Mogollon Rim, a town of 400 souls clinging to a valley floor between red rock mesas and a creek that ran strong in spring and barely whimpered by August. The town had the usual bones: a general store, a saloon, a livery, a small church with a bell that only worked when the wind was right, a post office that doubled as the telegraph office. What it also had was land trouble. The Santa Fe Railroad had surveyors coming through that summer of 1882, and where surveyors came, money followed, and where money followed, men with hidden motives and dark ambitions weren't far behind. Matilda Cooper had 160 acres that sat directly between the proposed eastern spur line and the nearest reliable water source for 40 miles. She knew it. The railroad men knew it. And Silas Drummond, who owned the Redemption Creek Bank and half the cattle interests in the county, absolutely knew it. Thomas Cooper had died 11 months prior, in October of 1881. He had died of a fever that came on fast and took him in 6 days, and Matilda had held his hand through every one of those 6 days and not slept a single night of them. She was 28 years old when she buried him. She had no children. She had no family in the territory. She had 160 acres, a half-broken herd of 40 cattle, 2 horses, and a stubbornness that the women of Redemption Creek had long since stopped trying to gentle out of her. She had also, in the weeks following Thomas's death, received 3 separate visits from representatives of Silas Drummond's interests, each one more pointed than the last, each one containing the same veiled message: sell the land, widow woman. You cannot possibly manage it alone. She had shown all 3 of them the door. She had then discovered, in January of 1882, while going through Thomas's papers, that her late husband had borrowed $1,200 from Drummond's bank 14 months before his death. She had not known about the loan. Thomas had not told her, and the knowledge of that hidden debt, hidden from her by the man she had loved and trusted, had added betrayal to grief in a combination that changed something fundamental in Matilda Cooper. It hardened her in some places. It cracked her open in others. It made her fiercely, almost pathologically determined to trust no one, depend on no one, and hold her land with both hands until her knuckles went white. The loan was due in full by the end of December 1882, $1,200 plus interest. She had approximately $320 to her name. Orville McCrae rode into Redemption Creek on a Thursday in June, on a blood bay gelding with a white blaze, trailing a spare horse loaded with surveying equipment. He was 32 years old, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been weathered by sun and wind into something that was not classically handsome but was absolutely compelling. A strong jaw, deep-set gray eyes, a mouth that seemed to hold more than it said. He took a room at the only boarding house in town, which was run by the widow Elsie Hartwell, who immediately informed him over his first supper that the most interesting person in the county was Matilda Cooper, and that if he needed anything regarding the eastern land parcels, he would have to deal with her eventually. Surveying for the railroad, Elsie had asked him, nodding at his equipment. Independent survey, Orville said. He ate his beans quietly. Hired by a land investment group out of Tucson. Elsie raised an eyebrow. She was 62 and had the face of someone who had cataloged every human deception she had ever witnessed for later use. Drummond's group? No, ma'am. His voice was flat and final. Not Drummond's group. Matilda heard about the new man in town the way she heard about everything slowly in pieces from the women at the dry goods store and the men who brought supplies out to her on Fridays. What she heard made her wary. A surveyor, land investment. Those words together sounded like another set of hands reaching for what was hers. She did not seek him out. She did not want to know him. Fate, as it tends to do in small frontier towns, made that position impossible to maintain. 3 weeks after Orville McCrae arrived, Matilda drove her wagon into town for supplies and came out of the general store to find Silas Drummond blocking the steps. Drummond was a wide man, not tall but solid in the way of men who had used their physical presence to intimidate others for so long it had become a reflex. He had pale eyes and a smile that never climbed higher than his cheeks. Matilda, he said her name like he was doing her a favor, wanted to talk to you about that note. The note is not due until December, she said. She kept her voice steady. Her hands were full of wrapped packages. I am aware. However, given the circumstances are that I have 6 months, Mr. Drummond, and I intend to use them. She moved to step around him. He stepped with her, not touching her, not doing anything that anyone could point to as aggressive, but filling the space between her and her wagon with deliberate precision. I have a very fair offer. I know what your offer is. She looked at him without flinching. I am not interested. You cannot run that spread alone, Matilda. It is not practical. It is not what it is, she said, her voice dropping to something that was very quiet and very dangerous. Is none of your concern until December. Good day. She got past him. She loaded her wagon. Her hands were shaking slightly by the time she reached the seat, and she hated herself for the shaking, because Drummond would see it if he was watching and it would tell him something she did not want him to know. She did not realize anyone had witnessed the exchange until she heard a voice from the alley beside the store. He does that often. She looked over. Orville McCrae was leaning against the store wall, arms folded, a canvas sack over one shoulder. He had clearly been waiting for the store to clear and had seen the whole thing. Does what? She said. Blocks people on the steps, tries to make himself between a person and where they need to be. She studied him. This was her first real look at him, close and deliberate, and she noted the gray eyes and the set of his shoulders, and the fact that he did not look at her the way most men did when they wanted something from her, not with that particular mixture of pity and calculation that Drummond's associates always wore. He looked at her like she was simply a person he had just observed in a situation, and he was curious about the situation. "You must be the surveyor," she said. "Orville McCrae." He did not offer his hand because she was up on the wagon seat and it would have been awkward. He just nodded. "You must be Matilda Cooper. The whole town tell you about me." "Elsie Hartwell told me about you. She told me quite a lot." "I am sure she did." Matilda gathered her reins. "For what it is worth, Mr. McCrae, whatever investment group you are working for, my land is not for sale." "That's not what I was going to say," he said. She paused with the reins in her hands. "Then what were you going to say?" He was quiet for a moment, looking not at her but at the spot where Drummond had been standing. Then he looked back up at her. "Just that men like that usually don't stop at polite requests. Might be worth knowing who your allies are." "I have managed without allies," she said. "Yes," he said, and there was something in his tone, not pity, not challenge, just a simple, observational agreement. "I can see that." She drove home with his words sitting in her chest and did her absolute best to ignore them, which was significantly harder than it should have been. She did not see him again for 11 days, and those 11 days were both a relief and, though she would not have admitted it, something else. A low, almost inaudible hum of anticipation she kept squashing the moment she recognized it. She had work to do. The herd needed moving to the north pasture because the creek level in the south had dropped. Two of her hired hands, she had two, the Navarro brothers, Ramon and Felix, who had worked the land since Thomas's time, had found a breach in the east fence that 3 head had slipped through before being rounded up. Ramon had rigged a temporary fix but told her the post itself was rotted at the base and would need replacing before the next hard wind. She added it to the list. The list was long. She was good at managing the list, even when it was exhausting, even when she lay awake at night doing arithmetic that never quite worked out in her favor. She was good at the arithmetic of survival. She had learned it young, growing up in a family that had crossed from Ohio to Texas when she was 8 years old, and she had watched her father hold on to 40 acres with his hands and his teeth long after most men would have quit, and she had inherited both his stubbornness and his belief that land was the only honest thing you could own in this world because it could not lie to you. The fence post stayed on the list. Ramon and Felix were busy with the herd and the irrigation channel that needed clearing. She told them not to worry about the fence for now. She would get to it herself this weekend. She did not get to it herself that weekend because a calf got stuck in the creek mud on Saturday morning, and by the time they freed it she was filthy and exhausted, and she simply went to bed at 9 o'clock with a book she did not read. The following Thursday was when Orville McCrae came to fix the fence. She did not ask him. She did not know how he knew about the fence. She did not know why he decided to do it. And when she stood at her kitchen window that morning watching him work, she was caught between gratitude and fury, and something so much softer and more dangerous than either of those things that she simply stood there paralyzed, trying with everything she had not to feel it. She eventually put her coffee cup down. She went out the back door around the side of the house and walked across the dry summer grass toward where he was working. He heard her coming and did not turn around immediately, just kept his hands on the new post, finishing the set, making sure it was plumb before he turned to look at her. "Good morning," he said. His voice was the same as she remembered it, level, not presumptuous. "You are on my property," she said. "I am aware. I did not invite you." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." He leaned the post driver against the new fence rail and pulled a cloth from his back pocket to wipe his hands. "I saw the break in the fence 3 days ago when I was running a survey line on the Ridge Road. I could see it from up there, looked like a rotted post. It was. Thought I'd fix it." Without asking, her voice was not quite accusatory, not quite flat. It landed somewhere in between. He looked at her steadily. "If I had asked, would you have said yes?" She held his gaze. She wanted to say yes, she would have said yes, of course she would have accepted help graciously and sensibly. But she looked at his gray eyes and she found, to her irritation, that she could not lie to them. "I don't know," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not a smile exactly, but a slight relaxation around his eyes. "That's honest." "I'm generally honest," she said. "What I don't understand is why you would take the time. You are a surveyor, you are busy, you do not know me." He was quiet for a beat, turning the cloth over in his hands. "I know enough," he said. "I know you've got a hard situation and you're handling it alone, and that fence was going to fall before winter if nobody fixed it." He shrugged, "A minimal thing. I had the posts and the time this morning. It seemed simple." "Nothing in this county is simple," she said. He tilted his head slightly, acknowledging that. "Maybe not. But this fence is fixed now." She looked at his work. It was good work. She could see that immediately. The new post was set deep and true, the rails measured and fitted properly, not just jammed in and hoped for. He had done it the right way, which meant he either knew what he was doing or had taken the time to learn before he started, and she was not sure which of those possibilities unnerved her more. "I would like to know what you want," she said. "Ma'am, Mr. McCrae." She kept her voice level. "Men don't fix things for nothing. Not around here. So I want to know what you want in return." He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him turning the question over, considering how to answer it, and she braced for the answer, for the mention of the land, the railroad, some investment proposition that would make everything make sense in the ugliest possible way. "Nothing," he said. "I don't want anything." She almost laughed, and it came out as a short, sharp exhale that was not quite laughter. "I do not believe that." "I know," he said. "That's all right." He picked up his tools, the post driver, his level, the remaining cut rails, and stacked them neatly at the edge of the fence line. "I'll collect these when I'm back this way." He walked back toward the road. She watched him go, and she hated the way she felt watching him leave, that hollow, contrary sensation, wanting him gone and wanting him to stay in the same breath, and hating herself for the wanting, because she had told herself that part of her was done. He was 50 yards down the road when she heard herself call after him. "I am not going to thank you." He stopped, looked back over his shoulder. "I didn't ask you to." She went back inside. She stood in her kitchen for a full minute, hands flat on the table, telling herself firmly that it meant nothing, that a fixed fence post was just a fixed fence post, that her heart was not doing whatever it seemed to be doing. Her heart was doing it anyway. She found out more about Orville McCrae in the following week from sources she would have preferred to do without, primarily Elsie Hartwell, who appeared to have made a study of the man, the way she made a study of everyone who passed through her boarding house. Orville was from Missouri, originally. He had come west in 1874, 8 years ago, initially working for the U.S. Army as a civilian cartographer on mapping surveys through the New Mexico Territory. He had left that work in 1878 under circumstances Elsie was unclear about, which meant the circumstances were probably something significant. He had been independent since then, doing land surveys and assessment work for various parties throughout Arizona and New Mexico. He had no wife. He had no children. He had a reputation, according to men who had worked with him on the survey line 2 counties over, for being absolutely reliable, and for having the particular quality of honesty that made people uncomfortable, not brutal honesty, not cruelty, but the kind of honest precision that saw things as they were and said so plainly. He also, Elsie noted, had twice in the past 2 weeks eaten his supper in the evening without speaking to anyone at all, which was either the sign of a man with a troubled conscience or a man who was doing a great deal of thinking. Matilda absorbed all of this information with what she believed was appropriate detachment. She also began, in a way she could not have fully articulated, to watch for him. Not conspicuously, not with any conscious intent. But she noticed when his horse was tied outside the telegraph office, noticed when his canvas sack was propped against the general store steps. She noticed, one morning when she was driving the wagon into town, that he was standing at the edge of the creek crossing looking at his survey maps, and she noticed the exact moment he looked up and saw her, and the exact quality of that look, which was not eager or calculating but simply warm, in the straightforward way of a fire that has been burning steadily for some time. She drove past without stopping. She spent the whole drive home being annoyed with herself. The situation changed dramatically on the 14th of July. She was working with Ramon and Felix in the north pasture, moving cattle, when Felix's boy, 12-year-old Alejandro, who ran errands in town for spending money, came riding out hard on their spare pony with a message. The message was from the county recorder's office. Silas Drummond had filed a petition challenging the validity of Thomas Cooper's original land claim, on grounds that Thomas Cooper had not met the continuous habitation requirement in the original Homestead Act entry, a petition that was, on its face, legally frivolous, but which Drummond clearly intended to use as a lever to force a forced sale or a prolonged legal fight that Matilda could not afford. She read the notice twice, standing in the north pasture with cattle moving around her, and she felt the cold weight of it settle in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. "What does it say?" Ramon asked, watching her face. "It says," she said carefully, folding the paper, "that Silas Drummond has decided the polite approach is finished." She drove into town that afternoon. The county recorder, a thin man named Herbert Finch, who always seemed to be slightly apologetic about whatever he was required to do in his official capacity, confirmed that the petition had been filed that morning, and that she had 30 days to respond with documentation of continuous habitation. "He knows we have met every requirement," she said. "Yes, ma'am, I suspect he does," Herbert said, looking at his desk. "But the filing itself, the legal response, the hearings, that takes time and it takes money," she finished. "Yes, I know." She left the recorder's office and stood on the boardwalk in the July heat, feeling, for one long, terrible moment, the peculiar despair of a person who has been fighting hard and who suddenly sees the shape of the trap that was always waiting. The loan. The petition. The timeline. It was not random. Drummond had planned this with patience, and the whole shape of it, the dark architecture of it, was becoming visible now that he had chosen to show his hand. She was so deep in thought that she nearly walked directly into Orville McCrae, who was coming out of the telegraph office 3 doors down. They both stopped. He looked at her face, which she knew told him more than she intended because she had not had time to arrange it. "Something's happened," he said. She was about to say she was fine and excuse herself. Instead, to her own surprise, she said, "Drummond filed a legal petition against my land claim this morning." His jaw tightened slightly. "On what grounds?" "Habitation requirement. It is fabricated. Thomas and I met every requirement, but the legal process will cost." She stopped. She was not going to enumerate her financial situation to a man she barely knew on a public boardwalk in the middle of the afternoon. "Come on," he said. He said it quietly, not urgently, not presumptuously, just plainly. "Elsie keeps iced tea in the evenings. Come and sit for a bit." She should have refused. Instead, she found herself on Elsie Hartwell's shaded porch 15 minutes later, with a glass of iced tea that was mostly water by now but still cool, and Orville McCrae sitting across from her in one of the wicker chairs, his hat on his knee. "Tell me about the original claim," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I did survey work for the Land Registry Office in Pima County 2 years ago, and I know exactly what the habitation requirements were under the 1862 Homestead Act as applied in the territory. And because," he paused briefly, "because it seems to me that Drummond has been building toward this for a while, and you should know exactly what you are dealing with before you walk into that recorder's office." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You know about the loan. I know Drummond holds a note on several properties in this county. I don't know the specifics of yours." $1,200, she said. "Due in December. Thomas took it without telling me." She said the last part evenly, the way she always said it, but she felt the familiar catch behind it, the old betrayal, the hidden fact of it, the way it had remade her understanding of her marriage. Orville said nothing for a moment. He was looking at his glass. Then he said, "That must have been a hard thing to find." "Yes," she said, "just that. It was." Something about the plainness of his response, not rushing to reassure her, not offering unnecessary comfort, Just acknowledging it the way a steady person acknowledges an honest thing made her feel, unexpectedly, a little less alone with it. She told him about the original claim Thomas had filed in March of 1875. They had built the house that summer and moved from Tucson by August. They had been continuously resident from August 1875 forward, more than 6 years before Thomas died and more than 7 by the current date. She had the receipts from the county recording, the tax records, letters from neighbors, witness statements that had been part of the original filing. Orville listened to all of it. He asked precise, specific questions: dates, document numbers, whether the original survey had been conducted by a certified federal surveyor or a territorial one, whether the plat map matched the current fence lines. "The plat map," she said, and stopped. "What about it?" "Thomas had it in the deed box. I have not looked at it recently." She was thinking back, running through memory the way you ran through a list, checking items. "When I last checked it, it was there. That was in February." "Is it still there?" She looked at him. "I have no reason to think it wouldn't be." "No," he said, "probably not, but it would be worth confirming. The original federal plat map signed by the certifying surveyor is the document Drummond cannot easily challenge. If it's in your possession and it matches the recorded entry, his petition has no foundation." She nodded slowly, working through this. "I should verify the documents and then file my response." "Yes," he paused. "I could look at them if you wanted, to make sure everything is in order before you file." She looked at him. The offer sat between them and she turned it over carefully. She had been telling herself she did not need him. She had been telling herself to keep him at a careful distance. But the petition was real and the trap was real, and she was smart enough to know that she could be both independent and not stupid about her options. "I will think about it," she said. She went home that evening and went directly to the deed box in the bedroom, the tin box that held the paper record of everything Thomas had built and everything she was now holding. The plat map was there. The original recording certificate was there. The tax receipts going back to 1875 were there. She went through every document methodically, cataloging, checking, and when she was done, she sat back on the bed floor and let out a long, slow breath. Everything was there. Everything was in order. And then she opened the last envelope in the box, one she had glanced at before and set aside, thinking it was a copy of something, and found it was not a copy. It was a letter written in Thomas's handwriting, dated 6 months before his death. She read it once. She set it down. She picked it up and read it again. It was addressed to Silas Drummond. It was a letter that made her understand, with devastating clarity, exactly why Thomas had taken that loan and exactly what Drummond had held over him. Thomas Cooper had not borrowed the money for the farm. He had borrowed it to cover a gambling debt he owed to a man in Tucson, a debt incurred in a single night 3 years before his death, a night he had apparently spent losing at cards what they could not afford to lose, and Drummond had been there or had found out about it, and Drummond had arranged for the note to be held in such a way that if Thomas defaulted, it would become a matter of public record that could destroy Thomas's reputation, and by extension, Matilda's standing in the community. Thomas had been trapped. He had kept it from her to protect her, or perhaps because he was ashamed. She would never know which. He was dead, and she was sitting on a bedroom floor in July 1882, holding the evidence of the thing he had hidden. And she felt grief and anger, and something that was almost mercy in its complexity. Because she had lived with this man for 7 years, and she had known him to be good in the deep, consistent ways that mattered, and one terrible night of weakness and the months of hidden shame that followed did not unmake all of that, even if it hurt. But it told her something important. It told her that Drummond had been planning this for years. Thomas's death had simply accelerated the timeline. She made a decision. She was going to need help. She drove to town the next morning and she found Orville McCrae at the land assessor's office where he was dropping off survey documents, and she said, without preamble, "I need to show you some documents. Will you come to the farm this afternoon?" He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Yes." He came at 3 o'clock, riding the blood bay, and she brought him to the kitchen table and laid out the documents in the order she had organized them the night before. She showed him everything: the plat map, the recording certificate, the tax records. She showed him Thomas's letter last. She watched him read it. She watched his face as he took in the content of it, the hidden motive, the debt, the trap Drummond had been setting for years. When he looked up, his gray eyes were steady. "Does anyone else know about this letter?" he asked. "No, I found it last night." "Drummond may not know you have it." "No," she agreed. "Or he may know exactly what it contains and assume it would simply break me." He was quiet for a moment. "Does it?" She met his eyes. "No." He nodded, and she could see that he believed her completely, and something about that uncomplicated belief steadied her in a way she had not expected. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking," she said, "that Drummond's petition is based on a fabricated legal argument, and that this letter demonstrates premeditation, that he has been engineering a situation to force a sale for at least 2 years. If this letter were to reach the right eyes at the county level or at the territorial land office, it would reframe the entire petition as bad faith," Orville said. "Which it is. Can you help me with the survey documentation? If there is any discrepancy between what Drummond's people file and the official federal survey, I need to know about it." "I can do more than that," he said. He hesitated for just a moment, and she saw him make a decision. "I need to tell you something about my current work." She stilled. Here it was. "All right. The investment group that hired me is out of Tucson, as I told you. They are not railroad men. They are a group of land trust investors who believe that Drummond has been systematically manipulating land records and loan instruments in this county to force distressed sales, and then flipping those properties to railroad-connected buyers at significant profit." He paused. "I was hired to conduct an independent survey of all affected parcels and provide documentation to the territorial attorney's office." She stared at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, she could hear Felix moving cattle in the south pasture, the distant low sound of it, the ordinary world continuing. "You are investigating Drummond," she said. "I am collecting evidence that will be submitted to the territorial attorney's office, yes." "How long have you been doing this?" "I have been in this county for 6 weeks. I have been building the case for 5 months, starting with records in Tucson." She absorbed this. She turned it over the way she had learned to turn everything over, looking for the trap in it, the hidden angle, the thing she was not seeing. "Why didn't you tell me this when we met?" she asked. "Because at the time I met you, I didn't know if your situation was connected to what I was documenting. And then it became clear that it was, and I wasn't certain how to approach you. You are not exactly—" He paused. "What?" "Easy to approach," he said, not unkindly, just accurately. She could not honestly argue with that. "What does this mean for the petition?" she asked. "It means that if you file your response with your documentation, and if simultaneously the territorial attorney receives my survey findings along with documentation of Drummond's pattern of behavior," he stopped. "It's not a guarantee, but it changes the landscape significantly." She looked at him across the kitchen table, at the documents spread between them, at the careful way he had laid out the reality of the situation for her without dressing it up. And she thought about the fence post. She thought about him standing there in the morning light, not having asked, not having wanted anything in return, just having seen something that needed doing and having done it. She thought about the way she had stood at the window and tried not to feel it. "Mr. McCrae," she said. "You can call me Orville," he said. She paused. "Orville." She said his name for the first time, and it felt strange and significant, like stepping onto new ground. "Why do you care about what happens to my farm?" He was quiet. He looked down at the table for a moment, and when he looked back up, there was something in his face that was more open than she had seen it, less controlled. "Because I watched men like Drummond do exactly this kind of thing to my family when I was 15 years old in Missouri," he said. "My father had a farm. There was a railroad coming through. A man with a bank and patience and bad intentions used a loan to take it." He said it plainly, the way he said most things, but she could hear the old wound in it, the dark past carried in the straightforward words. My father never recovered from it, not the land loss itself. The way it was done, the trap of it, he met her eyes. So when I see the same shape of thing happening, I tend to care about it. The silence stretched between them, full of things that neither of them were quite ready to say. I am sorry about your father, she said finally. I am sorry about your husband, he said. She nodded. She looked at the documents on the table. She made another decision, and this one felt different from the practical decisions. This one came from the softer, cracked-open place that she had been guarding so fiercely. I will make supper, she said. You can stay and we can plan this properly. He stayed. They worked until the sun was down and the lamps were lit, going through every document, building the sequence of evidence into something coherent. He knew the territorial land law with a precision that impressed her, not because she doubted his intelligence, but because the specificity of his knowledge made it clear he had been working on this case with real dedication. He had survey maps of every parcel Drummond had acquired in the past 4 years. He had comparative records showing market value against acquisition price. He had correspondence, obtained from sources he did not name, that connected Drummond directly to a buyer in the railroad land office. What she could add to it was Thomas's letter, which was the most direct evidence of premeditated entrapment in the whole collection. This letter is the linchpin, Orville said, looking at it again in the lamplight. With this, Drummond's petition becomes evidence of his own bad faith, not a legitimate legal challenge. I want to file the response myself, she said. Yes, he said immediately. You should. She looked at him, slightly surprised by the quickness of it. Most men in her experience had to be persuaded not to step in front of her. I'll send my materials to the territorial attorney the same day, he said. So it arrives as a supporting context, not as someone acting on your behalf. That is exactly right, she said. He smiled then. The first real smile she had seen from him, not the slight relaxation around the eyes she had noticed before, but an actual full smile, and it changed his face entirely, opened it up, made it younger, made it warm in a way that hit her squarely in the chest. She looked away. She began organizing the papers. You do that often, he said. She looked back. Do what? Look away when something surprises you. She considered denying it. Old habit, she said instead. He nodded and let it be. Over the next 3 weeks, they filed her response. They sent Orville's materials to Tucson. They waited, and in the waiting, they found themselves together more than either had strictly planned. He came by the farm 4 more times in those 3 weeks. Each time, ostensibly with survey-related questions, he was still completing his commissioned work in the area, and her land sat adjacent to several parcels he was documenting. Each time, the survey questions were answered in 15 minutes, and the remaining 2 hours were spent at her kitchen table or on the porch in the evening, talking. She discovered things about him steadily, the way you discover things about someone you are paying genuine attention to. He had read widely, more than she expected from a man who spent most of his time outdoors with instruments. He had opinions about the legal situation of native peoples in the territory that matched her own, which was not something she encountered often. He had worked alongside Apache and Navajo men during his Army survey years, and had come away from that work with an understanding of the land dispossession happening at the federal level that he found deeply troubling. He did not romanticize those years or his own role in them. He said plainly that Army survey work had served the expansion of a system that was doing real harm to people with their own prior claim, and that he had left that work in 1878 partly because he could not make peace with what it was in service of. She told him things too. She told him about Ohio and the journey west, about her father's 40 acres and the particular love of land that had been handed down to her like a family name. She told him about meeting Thomas in Tucson in 1874, about the 7 years of their life together, which had been genuinely good years in the ways that mattered. She was careful to say that, careful to be honest about it, because the hidden debt and the secret shame did not cancel what had been real. He listened to all of it with the same quality of attention he brought to everything complete, unpretentious, present. One evening in early August, they were sitting on the porch after a late supper that had started as coffee and become a full meal because neither of them had noticed the time passing until it was too late to be reasonable, and the desert night was coming on with its particular perfume of sage and cooling stone, and Matilda was looking at the east fence line, the repaired section, the new post standing straight in the evening light, and she said, without quite meaning to, "Thank you for the fence." He was quiet for a moment. "You said you weren't going to thank me. I changed my mind." She heard him shift in his chair. When she looked at him, he was looking at her with an expression she recognized because she had been trying not to see it for weeks. The particular way a person looks at someone they are falling in love with, when they are still in the process of losing the argument with themselves about it. She knew it because she had been making the same argument and losing it by the same margin. "Matilda," he said, and then stopped. "Do not," she said. He looked at her. "Do not what?" "Do not say something that we will have to reckon with before we know how the legal situation resolves." She met his eyes. "Because if Drummond wins, if I lose the land, I do not know what I will do or where I will go, and I am not—" She stopped. "I am not in a position to make room for something that I can't, Matilda." He said her name the same way, quiet and steady. "I am not going anywhere." She felt the words land in her chest. She felt them settle there like something heavy and warm and frightening. "You cannot know that," she said. "No," he said, "but I know it right now. That's what I can offer." She looked at him for a long time. The desert night settled around them, full of cricket sound and the distant movement of cattle and the tremendous, indifferent stars overhead. "Ask me again," she said finally. "When this is resolved." He nodded. He did not push. He simply nodded and looked out at the dark land, and they sat there together in the companionable near silence of two people who have reached an understanding, and Matilda felt something she had not felt in almost 2 years, the precise opposite of alone. The territorial attorney's response came in the 3rd week of August. It arrived as a formal notification that an investigation into the land practices of Silas Drummond and associated parties was being opened by the Office of the Arizona Territorial Attorney, and that all outstanding petitions filed by or on behalf of Drummond interests were subject to a stay pending investigation. Herbert Finch brought the notice to her personally, which was unusual enough that she knew it was significant before she even read it. She read it standing at her front door with the August sun blazing on the desert floor, and the smell of sage coming in on the hot wind, and her heart beating hard and even like that hammer on a fence post, like something that knew its own rhythm and had decided to trust it. Drummond's petition was stayed. Her land was safe, not permanently, not finally, not yet, but the immediate threat was removed, and the legal machinery that had been poised to grind her out of existence had been redirected. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands and allowed herself, very briefly, to shake. Just for a moment. Then she sat up straight, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and began making a list of what needed to be done next. She sent Alejandro with a message to Elsie Hartwell's boarding house that evening. The message said, "The notice came. Thank you. Come for supper Sunday if you are willing." Orville came for supper Sunday. He came at 6 o'clock with a bottle of wine that Elsie had apparently advised him to bring. A good Californian red that they absolutely could not afford to have been drinking in ordinary times, but which seemed exactly right for this particular evening. She had made a proper supper: roasted chicken with herbs, roasted potatoes, bread she had baked that morning, and a dried apple pie that had taken her 4 times longer than it should have because she kept getting distracted by the fact that she was making it for him, and then getting annoyed at herself for being distracted. He ate with genuine appreciation, the kind that is not performance but simply honest hunger met by good food. He helped her clear the table without being asked, did it naturally, stacking plates with the easy practicality of a man who had lived alone long enough that the work was just the work. They stood in the kitchen after the table cleared, the lamps burning low, the August night warm beyond the windows. "The investigation," she said. "How long will it take? Could be 6 months, could be a year." He was drying a plate. "But the stay on the petition holds throughout. Your land is protected in the interim. And the loan. If Drummond is found to have engaged in fraudulent loan practices which the letter and the pattern of behavior suggest, the territorial court can void those notes." He set down the plate. "I won't promise that, but it's a real possibility." She nodded. She was leaning against the kitchen counter, and she was aware of the closeness of him in the small kitchen, the particular reality of him in her domestic space, a thing that should have felt intrusive and instead felt. She stopped trying to categorize it. "Orville," she said. He turned to look at her. He was holding a dish towel, and his gray eyes were steady in the lamplight, and he looked absolutely ordinary and completely extraordinary in the same moment, and she thought, "This is it. This is the moment I stop fighting it." "You said to ask you again when it was resolved," he said. "It's not entirely resolved." "No," she said, "but it's far enough along." He put the dish towel down on the counter. He crossed the small kitchen in 2 steps, and he was standing in front of her, and she could see every line of his face in the lamplight, every year of it, the weathering and the steadiness and the way he looked at her like she was both the most complicated person he had ever met and the clearest. "I should tell you," he said, his voice careful, "that I have not done this in a very long time, wanted something like this." "Neither have I," she said. "And I know you have reasons to be careful." "I do," she said. "I have excellent reasons to be careful. You should know that I will probably continue to be extremely difficult." Something warm moved through his expression. "I know that too. And I will not give up the land, no matter what. It's not negotiable. Matilda," his voice was soft, "I would never ask you to." She believed him. She believed him with a certainty that was not naive or desperate but solid, the way the ground is solid, the way good fence posts are solid when they are set deep and true. She reached up and put her hand against the side of his face. A simple gesture, deliberate, and she felt him exhale. A long, slow breath, like a man setting down something heavy he has been carrying a long way. He kissed her gently, carefully, the way you do something you do not want to rush or ruin, and it was nothing like the sharp, bright thing of a first kiss in books. It was better than that, warmer and deeper, the kind of kiss that carries context and weight and the knowledge of everything that preceded it. She let herself feel it, all of it. She had earned that. They sat on the porch afterward until the night went deep, talking about ordinary things, the cattle, his survey work, the winter preparations she needed to start thinking about, whether the creek would run strong this year. Ordinary things that were completely extraordinary in the particular way of ordinary things shared with someone you have decided to trust. He rode home at 11 o'clock, and she stood in the doorway watching the lamp of his lantern move down the road, and she thought of the morning she had watched him from the kitchen window, fixing the fence she had not asked him to fix, and the battle she had fought with herself not to feel it. She had lost that battle gloriously. The investigation into Silas Drummond took 8 months in total. During those 8 months, the life of Matilda Cooper changed in ways that were both practical and profound. The practical changes came first, as they tend to. In September, Orville completed his commissioned survey work and submitted his full report to the territorial attorney's office. He could have moved on to the next contract. There was always a next contract in the land survey world of the Arizona Territory in 1882. He did not move on. He told the Land Trust Group in Tucson that he was remaining in Redemption Creek for the foreseeable future, and that any contracts they needed him for in the area were available to him, but he was not traveling. He took a longer-term arrangement with Elsie Hartwell for a room through the winter. He spent most of his evenings at Matilda's farm. He did not move in. She had a reputation in the town to maintain, and she was practical about that, not because she was ashamed of what was developing between them, but because in a small frontier community in 1882, a widow's standing was a real and useful thing, and she was not going to sacrifice it for sentiment. She said so to Orville plainly, and he said he understood completely, and she believed him, because he consistently, in all things, understood what she said to him the first time. He helped with the cattle, not as a hand, not as a hired man, not as someone taking over, but as a person who was present and capable and who saw what needed doing and did it in the same organic, unremarked way he had done the fence post. She stopped arguing with herself about accepting this. She accepted it. In return, she fed him and talked with him and gave him, she thought, something that she had not entirely named yet, but that she could feel building between them like the structure of something real and lasting. In October, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, she went to the small cemetery at the edge of town alone, as she did every year, and she stood at Thomas's grave for a long time. She had carried the letter with her, the one she had found in the deed box, and she read it again at the graveside, and then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket, and she said, quietly, some things that were meant only for Thomas, about the farm and about the loan, and about the forgiveness she had been working her way toward for 11 months, which was not finished yet, but which was further along than it had been. She said something about Orville, too, about the feeling of not being entirely alone anymore, and what it meant after such a long season of deliberate solitude. She thought Thomas would have approved. Thomas had been a man who understood the value of a good and steady person, even if his own final months had been marked by a failure of nerve that had hurt her. He had known what integrity looked like. He would have recognized it in Orville. She walked home from the cemetery in the October dusk, and Orville was sitting on her porch steps with 2 cups of coffee, because she had told him she was going to the cemetery, and he had intuited, without being told, exactly what kind of quiet company would be welcome after. She sat beside him on the steps. She took the coffee. They looked out at the desert evening together for a while. I think I am almost done being angry, she said eventually. He nodded. He did not ask who she was angry at or why or what done meant. He just nodded, and she understood that he had filed the information in the same way he filed everything precisely, without sentimentality for future use. Good, he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was the first time she had done anything like that, a simple, unconscious thing, a giving of weight. She felt him go very still for a moment, and then he shifted slightly so she was more comfortable, and that was all. In November, the territorial attorney's office sent preliminary findings to the county. 3 of Drummond's outstanding loan notes were identified as potentially fraudulent, including Thomas's note. The preliminary finding did not resolve the matter finally, but it was enough combined with the stay that was still in effect to push Drummond's legal position into territory that his own lawyer apparently advised was untenable. Drummond came to Matilda's farm in person on a gray November morning. He arrived alone, which surprised her, and she met him at the gate. She watched him from the window first, just for a moment watched his big, wide figure coming up the road, and she felt the familiar cold tightening in her chest. Then she put on her coat and went out to meet him, and she stood at the gate, and she did not move back when he stopped in front of her. He looked older, she thought. The investigation had cost him something. The certainty was out of his face. I am prepared to withdraw the petition, he said, and to negotiate a settlement on the note. There is nothing to negotiate, she said. The note was obtained through coercion. The territorial attorney's preliminary findings say so. He looked at her for a long moment. Thomas came to me, he said. He needed the money, I didn't force him. You held information over him and structured a loan you knew he could not repay in order to eventually acquire his land. That is the substance of what the attorney's office has found. She kept her voice even. I'm not interested in revisiting who came to whom. He was quiet. She could see the calculation happening behind his pale eyes, what he could still threaten, what leverage remained, whether there was any move left to him, and she watched the calculation run its course and come up empty. I'll have my lawyer contact the recorder's office, he said. Yes, she said, you should do that. He turned and walked back down the road. She watched him go, and she felt something she had not expected. Not triumph, which would have been too loud, but a quiet, deep-settledness. The thing was done. The trap was dismantled. She was still standing on her own land with the November wind coming off the mesas and the cattle moving in the north pasture and everything she had held on to still in her hands. She went back inside and allowed herself to feel that settledness for a good 5 minutes, which was, she decided, the appropriate amount of time. Then she started making a list of winter preparations. Orville was there when the formal letter arrived in December from the territorial attorney's office, confirming that Thomas's note had been voided on grounds of fraudulent inducement and that the petition had been formally withdrawn. He was at the kitchen table, a familiar position now, almost domestic, working on a land survey report for a client in Pima County while she sorted correspondence. She read the letter and then set it down on the table between them without saying anything. He picked it up. He read it. He looked up at her. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. He stood up from the table. She stood too, and he came around the table and he put his arms around her, not in a kiss this time, but in a hold, the kind that is about weight and solidity and presence. And she pressed her face against his shoulder and let out a breath that felt like it had been held since February when she found the papers in the deed box, or maybe since October of the previous year when she buried Thomas, or maybe since much longer ago than that. She did not cry. She was not built for it right then. But she let herself be held, and that was its own version of release. He asked her to marry him on Christmas Day. He did it simply, no performance, no elaborate setup. They were walking the north fence line after a late morning meal, checking the winter condition of the posts practical even on Christmas, because the land did not observe holidays, and he stopped at the place where the east fence joined the north, right near where he had fixed the broken post in June. She stopped with him. She knew something was coming because he had been quiet in an unusually deliberate way all morning. "I am going to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. He looked at her. The winter sun was low over the mesas, and the desert was very still and cold, and the sky was that deep particular blue of Arizona December. "I want to marry you," he said. "If you are willing." She looked at the fence post, the one he had fixed, new wood still holding true. She thought about all the mornings she had looked out the window, all the days they had sat at the kitchen table, all the conversations that had built something real and lasting between them. "I am willing," she said. He exhaled. It came out in a little cloud in the cold air. She saw for just a moment an expression on his face that was completely unguarded relief and joy and something deep and humble all at once, and it was the most honest thing she had ever seen on a human face. "Good," he said. His voice was not quite steady. She took his hand. They stood there at the junction of the east fence and the north fence, on her land, in the December light, and she thought, this is what it feels like when something ends well. When the dark past gives way and the hidden things are brought to light, and the trap springs on the people who set it, and the thing you thought you had lost turns out to be capable of becoming something new. She thought, I stood at that window and I tried not to feel it, and I was completely wrong to try. They were married in February of 1883, in the small church with the bell that only worked when the wind was right. The wind was right that day. The bell rang clearly, and the whole town of Redemption Creek seemed to be there. Elsie Hartwell in the front pew with her best hat, Ramon and Felix Navarro flanking their families in the second row, Herbert Finch looking quietly pleased, various neighbors and townspeople who had watched Matilda hold her ground for 17 months and were apparently invested in her happiness. Orville wore his best suit, which was a dark blue wool that he had evidently ordered from a dry goods catalog specifically for the occasion, and which made him look more formal than she was accustomed to, which she found charming in a way she would not have admitted to him for several months. She wore a dress she had made herself from a deep green wool and silk blend fabric that she had ordered from Tucson, a practical decision dressed up as a practical decision when it was actually, quietly, a vanity, because she had wanted to look well for him, and she was done pretending she did not have such ordinary human desires. They said their vows in front of the minister and the whole of Redemption Creek. And when he looked at her during those vows, she looked back without looking away, because she was done with that too. The reception was at Elsie's boarding house. Long tables set up in the main room, food that half the women in town had contributed, a fiddle player and a guitarist from the Mexican settlement south of town who played until 9 o'clock, and then until 10 when nobody would let them stop. Matilda danced, which she had not done since before Thomas's illness. Orville danced with her, somewhat less gracefully than she managed, but with such willing good humor about his own limitations that it made her laugh more than she had laughed in years. She watched him dancing with Elsie Hartwell at one point. Elsie, who came up to his shoulder, leading him through a step he did not know, and the particular warm fullness in her chest was so complete that she had to look away, not to hide it but simply because she needed a moment to hold it. She had not expected this. After everything, she had not expected to feel this. They went home to her farm that night, their farm now. She was thinking of it as such. And the February night was cold and clear with stars that seemed enormous and low, the way Arizona stars are in winter. And Orville unhitched the horses while she lit the lamps inside. And then they were in the house together, properly together for the first time, the doors closed against the winter night. She stood in the bedroom with the lamp lit, and she heard him come in the back door, heard him hang his coat, and she thought of all the times she had heard him in this house and felt the warm, particular reality of his presence. And now it was permanent, and it was freely chosen, and there was no fear in it, only the immense and simple rightness of a thing in its right place. He appeared in the bedroom doorway. He looked at her. "All right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Very much all right." Spring came to Redemption Creek with the usual transformative drama of the Arizona desert, the saguaro blooming, the creek running full again, the desert floor going from red and ochre to a brief, vivid green. The cattle had come through the winter well. The farm was in good condition. Orville had formally dissolved his arrangement with Elsie Hartwell and moved his modest possessions to the farm, which amounted to 2 large cases of books, his survey equipment, his tools, and a guitar he was profoundly mediocre at playing, but which he played anyway on quiet evenings with an endearing lack of self-consciousness. He had joined his survey practice with local land assessment work around the county, building a small, independent reputation. Silas Drummond had by the spring sold his banking interests under pressure from the territorial investigation and moved to Phoenix, where presumably he was someone else's problem. The land in Redemption Creek was settling back into something more honest. Matilda was good. She recognized the state of being good with some wonder, the way you recognize something you had begun to think might be permanently gone. She was not simply surviving. She was not simply holding on. She was living in the full dailiness of it, the conversation and the shared work and the evenings on the porch and the mornings where she woke to the sound of him already in the kitchen starting coffee, and that ordinary miracle of it. She told him in April that she was expecting a child. She told him in the morning before he went out to ride the fence line, their fence line, and she watched his face go through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, a kind of stunned stillness, and then a joy so pure and uncomplicated that it seemed to light him from the inside. He sat back down at the kitchen table and put his face in his hands for a moment. "Orville," she said, slightly alarmed. He looked up and his gray eyes were bright. He stopped. "I am just very glad," he said. "I did not expect to be, I did not think I would." He stopped again, which was unlike him. She sat down across from him. "You thought you were past the point of a family," she said. "I had stopped expecting it," he said honestly. "Yes." She reached across the table and took his hand. He turned it over and held hers in both of his, the way he held things when he meant to keep them. "We are not past it," she said. "No," he said, "we are not." Their son was born in December of 1883, on the 2nd day of the month, in the bedroom of the farmhouse during a cold night with Ramon Navarro's wife, Elena, serving as midwife. Orville paced the front porch for 3 hours, which was not useful but which he could not stop himself from doing, and when Alina came out and told him he could come in, he went in to find Matilda sitting up in bed, exhausted and formidable and magnificent, holding a red-faced, furious infant who had apparently arrived into the world with opinions. "He's perfect," Matilda said. She said it with a certainty that brooked no argument. Orville sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the baby with an expression that Matilda would afterward describe to Elsie as the most undone she had ever seen a composed man become. "He is," he agreed. His voice was wrecked. "He absolutely is." They named him James Thomas McCrae. James for Orville's father, who had lost his farm in Missouri and never recovered, because Orville wanted a James McCrae to have a different story. Thomas for Thomas Cooper, because Matilda felt it was right, because Thomas had been real and good in his deep ways even in his failures, and because the name was part of the history of this land and this family, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. James Thomas McCrae grew up on 160 acres of Arizona Territory land, under sky that was enormous and blue and indifferent to everything except the honest work done beneath it. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubbornness, which combination Orville privately considered the most formidable genetic inheritance a person could receive, and which he said to Matilda one evening when James was 2 and had already demonstrated that he intended to do everything himself without assistance from anyone and would thank you not to offer. "He gets the stubbornness from you too," Matilda said dryly. "Do not pretend otherwise." Orville conceded the point. A daughter came 3 years later in 1886. They named her Ruth. She had Matilda's brown hair and Orville's capacity for precise and focused attention, and she was, from the first week of her life, a completely different kind of person than James, quieter, watchful, with the particular intensity of someone cataloging the world for later use. The farm had grown by then, not through force or manipulation, but through the ordinary means of hard work and good seasons and careful management. They had increased the herd to nearly 80 head. They had a second hired hand, a young man from Texas named Cole who had shown up asking for work in the summer of 1884, and who was, under all his considerable roughness, a good worker and a decent person. Ramon's son Alejandro, who had written messages for $1 a week as a boy, had grown into a young man who was interested in learning surveying, and Orville had been teaching him, which felt like a right and good thing to be doing, passing something useful along to someone who had reason to use it. Redemption Creek had changed around them. The railroad did eventually come, though not the spur that had been the original source of the crisis. That project had been altered by the change in land ownership after Drummond's departure. The rail line that came in 1885 was the main line extension, coming through on the north side of the valley, and it brought with it a telegraph office that actually functioned reliably, a hardware merchant, a school, and a population that was both larger and more various than the town of Matilda's early frontier years. She watched it change and found that she felt about it as she felt about most things, clearly, with the pragmatism that had always been her natural mode. Some of it was good. Some of it was complicated. The influx of settlers put pressure on land that belonged to people who had been there before the United States had any claim to it, and that pressure was an injustice she was clear-eyed about even when there was little she could directly do about it. Orville used his survey work to document accurately what he found. He had made a professional practice of precision that did not serve political convenience, and she respected that and told him so, and he told her that her respect was worth more to him than most things, which was probably the most romantic statement he had ever made, and which she considered absolutely sincere. She also, in the year 1887, organized a small committee among the women of Redemption Creek to raise money for a school library, a thing that had been needed for years and that the town fathers had never quite gotten around to funding. She organized it with the same efficiency she brought to everything, and it was funded by June, and the books were arrived from Tucson by September, and the school librarian, a young woman of 20 from Ohio named Clara Briggs, who had come west on her own with considerably more nerve than plan, became one of Matilda's closest friends. "She reminds me of you," Orville said once, watching Clara hold a firm and cheerful argument with the town minister about the appropriateness of certain novels for the school collection. Matilda considered this. "She's much more cheerful than I am." "Yes," he agreed, "but the bone underneath is the same." She liked that he saw it. She liked that he saw things clearly and said them plainly, and that after 5 years of marriage she still found new things to like about him, not in spite of the reality of ordinary life together but woven through it, in the small daily evidences of who he was. Their third child was born in 1888, another boy. They named him Francis after no one in particular, just a name they both liked, and he arrived into the world with a cheerful tranquility that was unlike either of his parents or his older siblings, and which Orville privately attributed to the universe providing counterbalance. The farm was theirs. The land was clear. The loan was long voided. The investigation concluded, Drummond a distant, unpleasant memory. The fence post that Orville had fixed on that June morning in 1882, without being asked, because he had seen something that needed doing and had done it. That fence post had been replaced twice since then as the farm grew and the fence line extended, and nothing remarkable remained of the original timber. But Matilda knew exactly where it had stood. She could have found the spot in darkness. She sometimes thought of it when she passed that corner of the fence line. Not with nostalgia exactly. Nostalgia was too soft and imprecise for what she felt, but with a kind of structural gratitude for the thing that had started there. For the particular morning when a man had done an unrequested kindness and she had stood at her window and tried with everything she had not to feel it, and had failed so completely and so fruitfully that her whole life had changed. She thought about the window sometimes, about what she had looked like to herself, standing there in her defense, her guard so carefully assembled, her grief and her betrayal and her stubbornness all armored together into something that had kept her safe and also, she could see clearly now, had been slowly becoming a kind of prison. He had not stormed the prison. He had not demanded entry. He had simply stood at her east fence in the morning light and set a broken post right, with competence and care and no expectation of credit, and that had been enough, not to unlock the prison itself, but to make her wonder for the first time if she really needed to stay inside. She had come out eventually, on her own terms, at her own pace, through her own front door. That was the only way it could have worked. She knew that about herself, and he had known it about her from the beginning, which was perhaps the foundation of everything. On a summer evening in 1889, 7 years after that June morning, Matilda Cooper McCrae stood at the kitchen window of her farmhouse and watched Orville teaching James to ride the blood bay, who was older now but still steady and willing. James was 5 and fierce about his confidence, despite the evidence, and Orville was patient in the specific way of someone who finds a child's determination genuinely endearing rather than merely exhausting. Ruth was at the kitchen table behind Matilda, bent over a book with the absolute concentration of someone for whom the outside world had temporarily ceased to exist. Baby Francis was asleep in the small room beside the kitchen. The evening light came in gold and level over the mesa tops, hitting the fence posts and the dry grass and the moving figures of man and horse and boy in the middle distance. And Matilda stood at the window and felt something so large and complete that it had no precise name in English and probably no name in any language, because it was not one thing but many things braided love and gratitude, and the satisfaction of a life that had come through its hardest season and was now in full summer. And the very specific, crystalline, overwhelming quality of knowing that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. She felt it entirely. She let herself feel it. Orville looked up from the bay horse and saw her at the window. He raised one hand, just a slight lift of the hand, unhurried, across the distance of the yard, a gesture that said nothing in particular and everything necessary. She raised her hand back. James, not to be ignored, said something emphatic that was carried away by the evening wind before it reached her, and Orville looked back down at him with what she knew, from 7 years of reading his face, was the full force of his affection, patient and steady and absolutely certain of itself. She turned back to the kitchen. She put on the kettle. Ruth looked up from her book briefly, assessed the situation, mother, kitchen, kettle, no emergency, and went back to her reading. "What are you smiling at?" Ruth asked without looking up, because Ruth noticed things. "Nothing in particular," Matilda said. Ruth considered this. "You are smiling at Papa." "I was at the window," Matilda said. "Same thing," Ruth said, with the serene accuracy of a 6-year-old who has been paying very close attention. Matilda laughed. It was a full, real laugh, the kind she had been giving more freely for years now, the kind that started in the chest and came out without apology. Outside, she heard James let out a triumphant shout, and then Orville's voice saying something approving clearly, because the shouting intensified to the pitch of pure boyhood victory, and then the sound of hooves on dry ground moving in a small circle, controlled and deliberate. The kettle began to sing. The evening deepened over Redemption Creek, over the red mesas and the Summerthin Creek and the graves at the edge of town, and the new school building with its library and the boarding house, where Elsie Hartwell still held court at supper, though she had slowed down some in recent years and let her niece handle more of the work. It deepened over the 160 acres that Matilda had held with both hands through the worst season of her life, and the house on those acres where the lamps were lit now in the early dark. It deepened over the east fence, where a new post stood straight and true in ground that had proven over 7 years of seasons, willing to hold what was built upon it. Matilda poured the tea. She called out the window that supper would be 20 minutes. She heard Orville say they were coming. She heard James say he wanted to go once more. She heard Orville laugh. She stood in her kitchen with the tea steaming in the cups and her daughter reading at the table and her son's voice floating in through the window and her husband's laugh in the evening air, and she thought, I tried not to feel it. And then she thought, I am so glad I failed. She carried the cups to the table. She sat down across from Ruth. The evening came on fully, warm and complete over everything that was theirs.